Tonight, live on TVI, the Prime Minister and the State of the Nation. The interviewer, Llew Gardner.
Prime Minister, you're now completing your third year in office, the third year of what's almost become your personal fight to get Britain back on its feet. Are we winning the battle of the economy?
I think we're winning. I think I could perhaps best describe it by saying I think we've laid the foundations for a competitive industry that can expand the moment we get improvement in world trade. And that's quite some achievement because we weren't competitive before.
In sort of historical terms, where are we? Have we just had the battle of Dunkirk, or the defeat at Dunkirk, or have we got as far as Alamein?
Oh, I don't think those analogies hold at all. We have to fight our battles every day. They're never won. You've got to sell your goods every day. You've got to be efficient every day. You've constantly got to think of the morrow. It's a daily battle for each and every day.
Well, let's have a look at just this week, for instance. We saw that industrial production fell again in December. Both industrial and manufacturing production are considerably lower than they were when you came to office. How can you say we're even laying the foundations in those circumstances?
Let's deal with the December point first. Not surprising, was it, when we had really one of the coldest Decembers, not for 15 years, but really since the end of the 1800s. So, not surprising that production fell that month. If you take it over the whole quarter, it actually was up on the previous quarter. Yes, you're right, it is down over when I came in. There's been a world recession, not our fault. Germany, France, Europe suffering as well, some suffering even worse. Some got their unemployment actually rising faster than ours now. We're not responsible for that world recession, but I hope we're soon going to come out of it. Nevertheless, if we hadn't gone for the policies I've gone for, namely efficiency, increased productivity, getting the overmanning out of industry, we wouldn't be fit to compete with the Germans and Japs and French when we get an expansion in world trade. It has been difficult. What's happened is we've taken the overmanning and hidden unemployment out of industry, and it's come onto the unemployment register. But at least we've got an efficient industry from which to expand. And doing very well in exports.
If I may say so.
Yes, indeed. And you know, even countries like, for example, Germany, about 2 million, she was efficient. Her inflation is down to 6%. Even on a 2 million figure, it's much less than ours, but you have to remember, she and France have a whole year's conscription for all young people, so that takes a lot off the register. And you have to remember that she took in a lot of people for extra work when times were very good, but they left and went back to Turkey and Yugoslavia when times were not so good, so she lost jobs without getting increasing unemployment. Remember those things. Even for countries that are very efficient. We've struggled to get efficient, and last year our record in increased productivity was better than anyone.
But let me come back to the question of unemployment. I recall an interview of yours in which you said it really should be a question of pride, a question of saying I can look after myself and my family. This is a matter of personal pride. Prime Minister, how does an unemployed man in Liverpool, in Glasgow, in Newcastle look after his family? How does he have personal pride in your Britain of 82?
I entirely take your point. Of course, one would like everyone to have a job. But you know, if some of the people who talk so much about it were able to go out and create the businesses that would do the jobs and make the jobs, then I don't understand why they don't do so. Yes, I do want more jobs, obviously. So does Germany, so does France, so does everyone who is suffering from unemployment. What we have to consider is how best are those jobs of the future going to be created. They're not going to be created if we shy away from taking on new technology, if we shy away from getting rid of old labour practices. They're not going to be created if we have 2 men doing the work of one and taking 2 men's wages. We shall simply lose the business elsewhere. We're going through a period of new technology. We're going through a period when many countries overseas are producing the sort of goods which we used to produce and sell from here. All of that requires great adaptation. We cannot get the jobs of the future, which I am after more than anyone else, unless we compete.
Prime Minister, many of your critics and many of your sternest critics these days are in the ranks of the Conservative Party itself. They see the cost to the nation of 3 million unemployed as totally unacceptable. whatever the other gains that you may say come from your policies, they say that that figure of 3 million is damaging the whole social fabric of our country, and that somehow or other you have to do something now and immediately to end that situation.
Well, say what they may, and I agree. I would like everyone to have a job. The question is, how do we create them? Now let's let's go through it
You
in
could
order.
reflate.
Reflate. How in the world, if we reflated from 12% inflation, taking the annual level of inflation up, would we have a chance to compete with Germany on 6%, on Japan lower, on Switzerland lower? How would we have a chance? That would be pushing our problems into the future, taking a few artificial jobs now, not many, just a few, and then having a bigger inflation and an even bigger unemployment. It would also be saying to all the people who saved, look, I'm going to diminish the value of your savings deliberately. I'm going to make it more expensive to invest. Look, who's reflated in the past? The government of which I was a member, 1970 to 1974. We did a big reflation in 1973. It ultimately led to the highest rate of inflation this country's ever had, 18 months or so later. And we were panic-stricken. And eventually, shortly after that, in another year or so, we had to go to the IMF. It led to a property boom. It led to a secondary bank collapse. All of that led eventually to a much higher level of unemployment, 1.6 million. Then we had to try to deal with that high inflation.
May I come in, Prime
Then
Minister?
Mr. Callaghan reflated in 78, and we've gone through the whole of the thing again. Please don't go that way. Let's do it in a sound way this time. Really competitive, sound, honest, honourable money. Reflation is dishonest money, and no government should go that way. Your turn.
Thank you very much. Let me suggest to you that all the points that you make are the things that come from inflation. But and I come back to what I said before, what your critics say is that what is happening to the social fabric of the country, what is happening to the inner cities, what is happening last summer in the riots, these are all symptoms of 3 million unemployed, and that you may end up destroying more by the unemployed than you do by inflation.
I wouldn't say those riots were a symptom of unemployment. And I was interested that Lord Scarman did not put necessarily unemployment as high on his list. Indeed, it was very low. And indeed, you remember we had the Notting Hill riots years ago at a time of very considerable, almost full employment and very low inflation. So I don't think it's quite right to analyse it that way. But whichever way you take it, Mr. Gardner, there's not much point in going on commenting on it. We've got to say, how are we going to get the new jobs, the industries of the future, to compete with the Japanese? Because the Japanese have got the industries of the future. They embrace new technology, and they have not lost jobs through it. They've got very little unemployment. So we have to embrace new technology. We have to try to give help, and we are, to small businesses to start up and to expand. All that we are doing. And in the meantime, we have to say, well, we must give a hand, particularly to the young. So, and the vast majority of school leavers get jobs, but those who don't go on a special youth opportunities course. Or we've had a look, we've got a new scheme now. We think that one of the reasons that young people are not taken on is because the wages they have to be paid are too close to those of an experienced adult. Therefore, we've got a new scheme. It started on January the 2nd, where companies can take young people on in the first year away from school at £40 a week. And if they do so, then the taxpayer will pay £15 a week. There have been a lot of inquiries about that, and we've already got about 20,000 applications in about the first 6 weeks, and I think they'll go much faster. And then we've got a scheme, I might say, so it's rather similar to the German scheme, where we want to get to the position where a young school leaver, or at 16, a person can either stay on in full-time education, or can get a job, obviously, if there are jobs available, and a number of them will, or they'll go to some sort of training. I want to get to the position where unemployment is not an option. Education, job, or further training. So each and every one of them can look forward to something when they leave school. That's really the German scheme.
Prime Minister, a year ago you told an interviewer that we will not reflate. Are you telling me now, as we come up to the budget, that is still the message, quite firmly? We will not reflate?
Of course not. Of course we can't reflate. It would be totally wrong. And just let's get one thing clear. Anyone who says that we reflate is asking a government to be dishonest with money.
But Prime
This
Minister,
is what
the
it
CPI
is.
thinks you should reflate, the TUC thinks you should reflate, Mr Heath, Mr Rippon, Sir Ian Gilmore think you should reflate. Why are they all out of step and you in step?
I think we're perhaps using the word reflate in two different ways. All government spending has to be covered in one way or two ways. If government spends money, it's got to get it either from the taxpayer or from the savings of the people by borrowing them. Now, insofar as you spend money, therefore, you must cover it in one of those two ways. And you ought to limit your spending to reasonable taxation plus borrowing at a reasonable rate of interest. Now, if you're going to do that, you're all right on honest money. But there is already what I would call unemployed money in the economy. Of course there is. We've got 12% inflation. That means there's 12% of money which isn't going into increased production. It's going into increased prices and wages. There is that money available to go into increased production, and we're trying to get it in that direction. But that does mean a certain amount of discipline both on the part of government and on the part of industry.
A marginally reflationary budget, are you hinting at in that case? Everybody says they want something like 3 billion put into the economy. Are you prepared to go as far as that?
I'm not prepared to say anything about the budget for obvious reasons. I know you'd love me to. It'll be headlines tomorrow morning.
But you're hinting that there is some money available.
I'm not hinting. I am saying that you have to run your finances in a sound way if you want to be able to compete with countries that are doing that. And if you want to get the jobs here, the fact is that the countries that have run their finances in a sound, honest way have the lowest unemployment and have the best prospects for the future and the lowest inflation.